Clear Light of Day, Part 21. Esme, yesterday, in our story, had left Jabez sitting in the orchard, given up on that situation and gone back to her manse. When she reached the safety of the manse, Esme felt surprised and impressed with herself to see that she had made it out to Wiles Green and back, and had half an hour's conversation, and it still wasn't quite 10 o'clock. She made a cup of coffee and retreated to her study with 2 biscuits. She switched on the computer and, going online to check her inbox, she found an email from her superintendent minister. He had something to discuss with her, he said, and would she ring him to make an appointment? Email didn't come naturally or easily to Esme's superintendent, though he had recognised the necessity of electronic communications and mastered the basics required. He was of the old school and utterly predictable. In the study every morning, visiting in the afternoons, meetings in the evening. His wife, Sheila, had dedicated her life to being his mainstay and support. Her unself-conscious sweetness of manner and warm-hearted concern for others, providing the backbone of the pastoral care he offered. On the occasions she'd been in his manse, it amazed and intrigued Esme to see that after 37 years of ministry, when he heard the telephone ring, which he probably did about 20 times a day, her superintendent would still run from wherever he stood in the house to answer it. She wondered why he'd asked to see her. An inarticulate man with few social skills, he would never contact his colleagues unless he found it unavoidable to do so. A miner's son, brought up in a family of 7 children, frugality was nearer than second nature to him. His phone calls were short. His letters came by second-class post, and he would calculate in advance whether he had to mail them at all, carefully consulting his diary to ascertain if he might rather take advantage of crossing paths with the recipient at a forthcoming church business meeting. He had worked out the shortest distance from his manse to every destination that his work regularly encompassed. He wasted no money of his own and none of the circuits, though he was generous with both when called upon by others in need. His preaching was sound, safe, uninspiring, and conscientiously recycled over the 37 years, each sermon annotated with the occasion and venues of all its outings. Esme respected him. In his dealings with his colleagues, he erred from strict fairness only when he felt it necessary to be kind. He understood his administrative responsibilities clearly and undertook them with meticulous detail, remembered everything, and she trusted him to play his part in the circuit reconstruction with honesty, competence, kindness, discretion, and total lack of imagination. She picked up the telephone and dialed his number. 9:30 on a Tuesday morning in late November. He answered the telephone instantly being seated, as she had visualised, in the padded office swivel chair provided by the circuit, at his desk in his study. "Brian Robinson," he said, in his loud, unemotional way. "Hello, it's Esme. You wanted to see me?" "Ah, yes, my dear. Some news from the chairman I'd like to discuss with you when you can spare a moment." "I can come over today if you like," she replied. "Today? Now let me see. I've got a funeral call later this morning, about 11, and a Wesley Guild in the afternoon. Tomorrow's my midweek communion, and then in the afternoon I'm running Sheila to the osteopath for her regular visit, taking in some pastoral calls on the way home. How about Thursday?" "Can't do," said Esme. "I've got a school assembly early, a sick communion, then I'm the speaker for the ladies' fellowship at Brockhurst Priory after lunch, and I've got a wedding rehearsal in the evening. Friday's busy all day too. I mean, I can pop over right now. I can be with you in 10 minutes, or even we can talk on the phone." "Oh no, I'd rather not discuss this on the telephone. Let me see." He paused. She could hear him breathing. He already had a funeral call to take him away from his sermon preparation in the study. This would further eat into his time. It was Tuesday, and he liked to type up and print his order of service and notices sheet on Thursday morning. The sermon would have to be finished before then. Esme could feel him weighing it up in his mind. "Well, all right. My funeral call is no more than half a mile from you. I'll finish off this correspondence later and come over to you now. See you shortly. Righto." Puzzled and curious, a quarter of an hour later, Esme opened the door to his ring on the loud electric bell and offered him coffee. He accepted the offer, but asked for a small cup. Since he passed his 60th birthday, large cups of coffee taken early had started to be a problem to him later in the morning. He seated himself on her sofa. She gave him a coffee and sat in the armchair and looked at him. His almost bald head, covered by a few thin strands, combed carefully from above his left ear, over the pink, shining expanse of his scalp, to meet the balancing growth of hair at his right ear. The elbows and cuffs of his battered tweed jacket had been reinforced with leather, probably by Sheila. His hand-knitted dark blue waistcoat concealed the fact that his clerical shirt was really only a stock, easily removed when it was time to do his half hour of gardening, while Sheila washed up the dishes after their lunch. "Well," said Esme, "it's about your appointment, my dear." It transpired that a minister from a circuit in a wealthy suburb of London had rather precipitately abandoned his congregation in the company of his senior steward, who was the wife of his organist. The organist, heartbroken and embittered, had refused to have anything further to do with the Methodist Church and offered his services to the Baptists. They gratefully accepted, having been managing for years with a second-rate pianist who could neither sight read nor play the pedals. The church community had been left shocked and distressed. without a minister, a senior steward, or an organist. In the immediate emergency, the chairman himself had plugged such gaps as he could, and the other staff of the circuit had arranged medium-term pastoral and preaching cover. But the chairman had promised to do what he could to secure a new minister without waiting for the usual slow wheels of stationing to begin to grind. Knowing that when Esme left she would not be replaced, it had occurred to him that though she should give her congregations ample time to adjust, nonetheless her move might be brought forward and considered before the usual time in May if she were interested in investigating this possibility. "It's a plum job," her superintendent stated frankly. "If you want to do well, this would set you on your way. They wouldn't tolerate just anybody in that part of Surrey. It's a compliment to your preaching and your admin gifts. There's a rough patch in that circuit, but the section they're offering you is very smart indeed. Good manse, I've been in it. It's a compliment to your pastoral gifts too. It will take something to pull the congregation through this in one piece. The chairman thinks highly of you, my dear. He knows you won't let him down. What do you think? Take a look?" Something in Esme's stomach gave a lurch as the reality of her move came alarmingly nearer. She hesitated. Then, reasoning that as she had committed herself to going, this could save protracted uncertainty and prove a shrewd step on her inevitably nomadic chosen path, she agreed to pursue the matter. Her superintendent congratulated her. Evidently he approved. It made little difference in this circuit, except for accelerating the timetable of restructuring. It would help the chairman out of a hole, which would be regarded favourably, and he felt it would be a sound and positive step for Esme, which made him feel a lot better about her having been edged out of the team. Without real thought or discussion, she found herself crossing another threshold. When he left, promising to contact the chairman for her, who would initiate the necessary liaison, Esme closed the door behind him and leaned her back on it, feeling shaky and terribly weary. This had been a sound decision for a minister. If she discussed it with her mother or any of her family, they would be enthusiastic, Esme felt sure. Her colleagues would be impressed and think she'd done well. The circuit stewards would feel relieved. Her own church stewards and members would feel as positive about this as any move. It was only with a sigh, feeling slow and tired and inexplicably miserable, Esme made her way like a sleepwalker to the kitchen. She made herself another coffee, and being temporarily out of flapjacks, took half a packet of biscuits into her study with her. She sat down at her desk and opened the document folder on the computer to check her notes for the last school assembly she'd done. Until she'd talked this through with Jabez, she wouldn't really know what she thought about it herself. And what were the implications of that? She asked herself. And why, anyway, did the deepest part of her say, not yet, not yet? Whenever she thought about telling Jabez and Ember, would it cause them so much of a problem? They had certainly been good friends, but she told herself it would be vanity to presume she figured that much in their lives, whatever had passed between them this morning. She opened the file named Priory Street Infant School. She put Ember and Jabez and everything about the move out of her mind. Nothing had been decided. It would take ages anyway. Next week saw the beginning of Advent. She was unlikely to hear anything before New Year. Esme worked determinedly through what remained of the morning. She cycled out to see a blind and frail housebound church member on the outskirts of Brockhurst Priory in the afternoon. On the way home, she called into the DVD library to choose a film, then stopped at the supermarket and did her shopping, wobbling rather precariously home with her bicycle basket full and 3 carrier bags dangling from the handlebars, unevenly weighting the bike. She spent 3 hours as afternoon crossed over into evening, ransacking poetry anthologies and the internet to put together a presentation for the Ladies' Fellowship on the spirituality of winter. While her supper heated in the microwave, she printed out the poems she'd downloaded, and then she took her meal on a tray with a cup of coffee into the sitting room to watch her film. She ate her supper from the plastic container it had come in, telling herself that this was simplicity as interpreted by the 21st century. In another mood, she might have found the film funny and touching. Tonight it just seemed irritating and trite. She paused it 4 times to answer the telephone, without really minding the interruption. At 11 o'clock that night, the film finished, and she took the tray through the dark passage into the kitchen, where she caught sight of her bicycle handlebars resting against the windowsill. She'd forgotten to put it away in the shed. She deposited her fork and mug in the sink. She looked at the encrusted remains of over-microwaved lasagna on the walls of the empty plastic container and guiltily threw it in the bin, trying not to think about Jabez's disapproval of excess packaging. And then she opened the kitchen door and went out into the back garden to put her bike away. The streets were quiet at this time of night, apart from the sound of a vehicle with a diesel engine climbing the hill toward the manse and then ceasing somewhere nearby. She took hold of the cold bike, and as she wheeled it to the shed, she stopped to look up at the night sky. Here in South Harbour, the darkness was never profound enough for many stars to be seen. But tonight a sickle moon shone clear and bright in a sky mostly clear of cloud now, and the tingle of frost nipped the end of her nose. In the shed, she startled herself by treading on an empty plastic flower pot which broke with a loud crack. It was difficult to stow the bike in the dark, especially as the shed was not large and already accommodated the lawnmower. Extricating herself, she shot home the bolt to fasten the door and snapped the padlock shut. As she did so, she half thought she heard someone speak her name, and with a sudden fright as she turned, she realised she was not alone in the garden. Her clutch of terror turned to simple astonishment as she recognised the figure standing on the frosty grass between the gate at the bottom of the garden and the shed where she stood herself. Jabez? Esme's breath as she spoke lingered in a cloud on the frigid moonlit air. She stared at him in amazement. For Jabez, indeed, it was. She had not been mistaken in thinking she heard his voice quietly speak her name, half wanting her to hear, half afraid to reveal his presence. The moonlight discerned him, but though he held something in his hand, she did not take in what he had there. Now seen, he stood there quite still, and across that distance of yards, and even in the dimness of the night, there formed between Esme's eyes and his an electric corridor, such that she felt she might say for certain, and maybe for the first time ever, that looking into the eyes of Jabez Ferrell, her eyes had beheld an immortal soul. He did not move, just looked at her with eyes as full of life, as vital, as those of a fox or deer or any wild thing that first surprised will hold your gaze in message and appraisal. Total encounter, a momentary precursor to inevitable flight. It occurred to Esme that he had expected to find her out in the garden as little as she had expected to find him. Her immediate surmise that something was wrong gave way to a sense that, having not expected to be discovered, he was urgently contemplating retreat. And so it came about that Esme abandoned her first intention of speech. "Are you all right?" The question framed in practical, conventional format in the bright, sociable mind that filled all the front stage of her habitual thinking. And instead, from somewhere else, perhaps from the twilight mind of her solar plexus, reaching out to worlds beyond, came unbidden the words she actually said. "Don't run away. Please. Don't run away." And she said it to the wildness and shyness in him, to his privacy, and to the depths of half-healed pain in him that for some reason she couldn't understand suddenly stood before her. His face changed then. The uncertainty of the wild thing poised on the brink of flight crystallised into something more frightened as will came in to control instinct, and he knew he would stay. He came across the garden to her. She understood when he spoke. The fear that had stolen across him like a shadow more sombre than the darkness bewildered her until she heard him say, "I brought you some flowers." Flowers. In November. In the middle of the night. And then she felt as scared as he did, because obviously he was offering her his heart. And where did that leave them? Esme thought fast. She could see no way to not hurt him. To accept the implicit gift of his love would be a gross unfairness in view of her intention of moving away. To refuse it would wound and humiliate him. He saw her hesitation, and something changed. He did his own quick thinking. I've been uneasy all day about what was said this morning. His eyes met hers, and she saw the flicker of prevarication in them. "I hadn't thought to find you out and about at this hour. I thought you'd be in bed. It had been my intention to leave these here for you, for the morning, to apologise. Ember and me, we may overstep the mark sometimes. We're simple country folk. You mustn't expect we'll always get it right." Esme had to admire the skill with which he turned his self-offering into the building of an unbridgeable chasm between them. It hurt, though. "Ember and you," she said, picking up the very deliberate discontinuity he had placed between them and her. "Simple country folk. Are you?" Her eyes met his gaze, level and direct. "Yes," he replied quietly. Oh God, her soul sent its silent distress flare. "Now don't let us turn this into a fight." Troubled, anxious not to damage the friendship between them that had become such a source of strength to her. Instinctively, without conscious formulation, the core of her spirit reached out for help and strength. Jabez looked down at the flowers in his hand and held them out to her. In the garden at the front of his cottage, one yellow rose that climbed against the house bloomed gamely on into December, mingled with ivy from the hedge, rosemary, and a feathery spray of blue juniper. Filched from the garden of the old police house, she recognised it. The last of these roses were what he had brought her. "Jabez, come inside," she said as she put out her hand to take his flowers, and he rewarded her with a tense, shy smile. "I think I best not stay." She felt the splinting of his pride in the stillness of the way he spoke. Jabez. But he shook his head. "I'll see you soon," he said gently. "Leave it now." He left the roses in her hand, and in an understated gesture of finality, he turned and made his way across the moonlit garden, out through the gate, as quietly as he had come. "I'll see you soon." She examined this small token of hope. It was something, but she felt bereft. It felt impossible, too difficult. Jabez's life had been built on a different foundation entirely from hers. His sense of self and his sense of belonging grew out of rootedness in the earth and the family, out of how he had loved, and out of the making of his hands. What Esme aspired to had been based on professional achievement and on membership of a body of people scattered across the world, some whom she had never met, some all too familiar. But they were bonded together by the traditions and doctrines they believed in, or in some cases accepted without analysis for the comfort of a sense of belonging. She felt a sudden, sharp misgiving about the wisdom of tying home and income to so structured an ideology. What happens when a person changes? She asked herself in sudden panic. To walk with God is an unfolding rhythm of life, a wild music of many moods and tempos, embracing the shadows of doubt and disillusionment and the black dark of despair, as well as the sweet blue heavens of joy and affirmation, the glorious sunset colours of the soul moved by beauty, amazed by peace. To serve the church as an ordained minister is an altogether narrower, more prosaic thing. As she stood there alone, holding her flowers, and still looking along the empty garden at the gate Jabez had closed behind him, Esme became aware of herself shivering. She went indoors, finding a vase for her flowers, locking up for the night, making a hot water bottle for her bed. The core of her congealed into a hard lump of wretchedness. "I'm sorry, Jabez," she whispered in the darkness as she curled round her hot water bottle in her cold bed. "I'll come out and see you in the morning." Where do you fit in to the body of believers, to the path of faith? Do you belong to a church? Does that feel like your spiritual home? Do you feel comfortable with, do you feel an allegiance to the teachings of your church, if you do belong to one? Or are you a bit more of a cat that walks alone spiritually, Or do you belong to a completely different faith body, like a Buddhist Sangha or something? What's your background? Does it feel permanent to you or fragile? Where are you on your faith journey? Heavenly Father, as you sent to the wise men a star, and as you sent to the infant Jesus, Joseph, to protect and guide him and take him out of harm's way, I pray that you will send to us the protectors of life and wise guides and a star to light our way so that we do not miss your purposes for us. I pray that the guides you send will watch over the infant Christ in us, that the star that shines for us will lead us into the presence of Jesus, the house where he dwells. Help us, Father, to choose wisely, to follow faithfully, and to love without reserve. In Jesus' name, Amen. Well, may this be a good day for you. May you be happy, may you be free, and may there be something luminous that lingers in your mind to bring you inspiration. Go well. God bless you.